Echiro Oda just dropped 5 new devil fruits, each with absolutely insane power, and some of which in the hands of absolutely insane people. In fact, I would say that 4 out of 5 of them aren't people that I'd particularly want to run into in a dark alleyway. And yes, I'm including Kuchaku in that group. I know that some of you would disagree and have commented en masse about your various preferences, so just know that yes, you have been heard, and yes, you have been ignored. Starting with Avalo Pizarro, he has the Shima Shima no Mi, or the Island fruit, the word Shima meaning island, although due to Rendaku, you may also encounter it as Jima, as in Sora Jima, aka Sky Island. But this fruit is both fascinating and repetitive, because we have seen something very similar with Pika, however there are some massive differences. Pika had the Ishi Ishi no Mi, which allowed him to assimilate into and control stone specifically, so Pizarro's fruit seems like the direct superior to that, allowing him to control any substance as long as it's part of the island. And I guess what I find most interesting is the word island, because it's very specific but also very vague. For example, does Pizarro have to engage in what I am going to call a form of island monogamy, where he has to choose a single island to assimilate with, or can he act as something of an island floozy and hop all across the Grand Line assimilating with as many partners as he sees fit? Because if it's the second, then the designation of island doesn't really matter. In the world of One Piece, there are pretty much only islands, so Pizarro has the ability to merge with any kind of land. The one exception to that is the Red Line, which is the only continent on the One Piece planet, and semantically, I do wonder how that interacts with Pizarro's fruit, mostly because it would be pretty damn cool and pretty damn terrifying to see him literally become the Red Line. I'm imagining that scene in Attack on Titan where part of the wall falls and you just see Pizarro's face. But this fruit seems incredibly overpowered. Not just in terms of like fight power, which is pretty overwhelming. Fighting an island is difficult, but more so for intelligence. With this fruit, Pizarro can merge with an island and discover all of its hidden secrets, like say a certain Wano. Pizarro could become one with the island and just instantly find Pluton, or maybe even merge with Laugh Tale and find the One Piece. Pizarro does have an interesting bonus ability where the island he merges with seems to become part of his body, or at least an extension of it in terms of feeling, because he knew where Kobe was because of like a tingling on his left nipple. I forget exactly what it was, but the idea of sensation isn't something that applied to Pika as far as we know. So it opens up the door of, does Pizarro feel pain when the island is damaged? Sort of like how Robin feels pain from the external limb she creates. But even if not, look, there is still some potential for things to get very awkward. Pizarro, mate, where are the escaped slaves? Well, you see, Captain, I'm not entirely sure, but I've got this weird feeling on my behind and oh no, they're up my butt. But with that in mind, I imagine the Garp's attack could have significantly damaged Pizarro. However, if it functions more similarly to Pika's, then this fruit is just insane. And I said this in the chapter review, but I am close to 100% certain that the only reason why this fruit exists at all is because Oda wanted to do something wacky and make the Hachinosu skull talk in a very cartoony way. Something I like about the Blackbeard Pirates is that yes, they have this very sinister tint, but they are by and large just a group of wacky individuals just like the Straw Hats. And I guess the ultimate question is, does Pizarro still have a true body like Pika did in the stone, or does the island actually become his body? Because right now, given the sensations, I'm leaning towards the latter, which would be great because it means he can't be beaten in the same way that Pika was. But also, you just know that Zoro is going to see this power and go, not again. Or maybe not. After not recognizing the Lunarians, maybe he just forgets he even fought Pika to begin with. Vasco Shot is now the proud and mostly conscious owner of the Gabu Gabu no Mi, which is the Licka Licka fruit, and was translated as the Glug Glug fruit in the scans. Glug Glug is in the sound of drinking. Most devil fruits are based on some sort of onomatopoeia, but I do think that alcohol is pretty important to keep in mind, because you can glug glug almost any liquid, and if this fruit was, say, just a drink fruit, which I think literally would be the Nomi Nomi Nomi, if that was the case, then it would literally be able to control all liquid. So I consider Vasco Shot to be the Smoker as opposed to the Caesar in this scenario, because Smoker can control a type of gas while Caesar can control all gas in general. And in the case of Vasco Shot, he seems to only be able to control alcohol. And given that Vasco Shot can create bubbles, it's implied that this is a generation style paramecia, meaning that he could potentially conjure and manipulate alcohol, which is very rare. We don't often see liquid substances in devil fruits. And it reminds me a lot of Magellan's poison because he was also able to create bubbles in between creating 10 hours worth of massive relentless dumps due to eating poison, that is. And look, if that were true, then I would say that Vasco Shot's natural opponent is Zoro. Sort of like the Luffy versus Cracker fight where Luffy kept eating the biscuits. Zoro could just keep drinking Vasco Shot's powers and realize his full potential as a drunken swordmaster. Then again, Sanji is also a good choice. There's nothing like a good battle between chef and ingredient. However, there could be other options for how this power could function. And despite the bubbles, it may be a bit of a left field paramecia. Like say it gives the user abilities that require alcohol as a fuel. Not too dissimilar from how Frankie uses cola as a fuel, which would definitely make me want a Frankie versus Vasco Shot fight. fight, one where they trade substances, giving us a drunk Frankie and a high on sugar Vasco shot. Or maybe the more of the fruit's power you use and the more drunker you get, which I suppose would impair most people, but a Giga Chad like Vasco shot, nah, no problem. And you know what, maybe it can even influence opponents and make them drunk. But the Occam's razor answer is the more simplistic generation and manipulation, which would also make Vasco shot quite the fire hazard as implied in chapter 1080, because he could douse anything in alcohol and then just set it alight. To San Juan Wolf, and we've known he was a devil fruit user for a long time now, but the name of his fruit is new and it's the Deca Deca meaning big and Deca meaning like really big. Fun fact, San Juan Wolf is the only known giant to have eaten a devil fruit, with the exception of another fun fact, which is that non-canonically we have also had two other fruit using giants. And rather bizarrely, this is insane, they use the exact same devil fruit, which is also the exact inverse of San Juan Wolf's fruit. Both Lily and Stamach from the anime filler, and Blue from a really old One Piece PS2 game, possessed a power called the Mini no Mi, which allows the user to shrink. And admittedly, that's a pretty fun idea, taking a giant and giving them the power to become super small. In fact, it's such a fun idea that they've gone and done it twice. And you know what? I'm not entirely convinced that this was on purpose. I imagine that whoever created Lily had no idea that Blue even existed, and that they just coincidentally stumbled on the same idea. Although sadly, this does go on to imply that in the non-canon world, Blue is dead. But I'm really keen to know what the limits of San Juan Wolf's fruit are. For example, one thing that perpetually confuses me is that despite being a devil fruit user, San Juan Wolf is completely unfazed by being in the ocean. In fact, his epithet is the colossal battleship. So how can he be up to his neck in seawater and still not have it affect him? But his base height is 180 meters, which is slightly taller than the Washington Monument, and if this fruit does allow, as we suspect, San Juan Wolf to actually walk on the seafloor, then that would imply that he can grow at least up to 10,000 meters tall. And if he was to do that on land, then he would reach the general height of Sky Islands. However, even then, that still wouldn't make him the tallest living thing in the world. That title still belongs to Zunesha, who is a whopping 35 kilometers tall, meaning that his body extends from the bottom of the seafloor to 15,000 meters above Sky Islands. Although the real game changer would be if San Juan Wolf can use this fruit on things other than himself. But to potentially the most versatile new fruit, Prince Gru is the user of the Gunyo no Mi, which appears to allow him to conjure and manipulate clay. And I'd say that it's the clay equivalent of Galdino's wax fruit, but there's a pretty huge difference here in that Gru can create golems. I mean, yeah, Galdino made all sorts of fun wax constructs and even copies of himself that he got painted by Miss Golden Week, but I think that this is something very different. The golems of Gru appear to have some sort of independent thought, and when I first read the chapter, I initially thought that he created clay copies of his marine comrades. But the more I think about it, the more I think that these marines may have just been Gru's golems all along. These marines may not actually exist. They're just the result of Gru's abilities being able to give life, because that's what a golem is. Creatures brought to life from assorted elements. And we have seen life-giving powers in the past, specifically with Big Mom's soul abilities, but also even with stuff like Perona being able to create hollows that undertake her commands with a sense of self-agency. To be fair, I could be thinking about this a bit too deeply, because the problem here is that it's kind of like a Basil Hawkins style mystery. His devil fruit, theoretically, just creates and manipulates straw, and it's never explained how it functions with all of the voodoo stuff as well as other cards, so we never actually found out whether that's a specific part of the fruit unlocked by imagination, or if it's just a completely separate magical power. When you think about it though, what Gru can do is create a series of budget Logia users, which is incredibly useful, and if it does end up being more along the lines of the wax fruit, then the potential for clay is limitless. But now we arrive at what I'm going to call the most interesting new devil fruit. Kuchaku's Muchi no Mi, or the Whip fruit, is quite the fascinating existence that at first I thought was a variant on Diamante's flag fruit, like the idea that Kuchaku can turn whatever object she touches into a whip. But then it became clear that we are dealing with a whole new subgenre of magical fruit, which I am going to label the BDSM class, because it allows Kuchaku to command objects by accusing them of being, quote, bad boys. And in a really weird way, this fruit may even exist as a direct counter to Avalo Pizarro's powers, because he can become an island, but Kuchaku could just potentially give him a bit of a smack and order him around. It's also implied that this fruit does work on people, because Kuchaku does, rather sensually, threaten the people who are watching her disciplining the building, which is a sentence that I don't think anyone has ever said prior to the existence of this chapter. And when it comes to people, I wonder if this fruit functions in a similar way to the Mera no Mi, the power of which directly correlates to the lust of the target. But it may be even more powerful than that, because Boa Hancock can't use her abilities on buildings. It also reminds me a bit of Suru's fruit, the Washu no Mi, which allows her to clean evil from her targets, cleansing them from all sorts of impurities purity, so this whole family line has a bit of a manipulation factor going on. Big question though, what would happen if Sanji was faced with this fruit? Because really, he would follow Kuchaku's commands without the power manipulating him. So we could end up in an Usopp Perona scenario, whereby you can't take advantage of Sanji's thirst because he's already far too thirsty. I also think I'm starting to see a bit of a pattern happening here with Oda, and I am 90% sure that he is quite submissive, because at this point there are so many female characters with distinctly domination-focused abilities and personalities that I think Oda is taking some time in One Piece to do a little something for himself. Stuff like this is a breath of fresh air though, because after 4 years of Wano, I am conditioned to think of new Devil Fruit users quite specifically as new Zoan users, so it's really nice to get back into the world of weird, wacky paramecia powers. And do let me know what your favorite new fruit ability is in the comments below.